So if you have anything that you want to come back to later, it will be available to come and learn from in the future. And then if you have any questions, and we hope you will, please pop them in the Q&A or the chat. We'll come to them at the end there and make sure that you're able to get your answers. So that's everything from me. I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful speakers to begin.
Great, thanks so much, Brett. So I'm Matthew Guntag with the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs. So I'll kick things off and then turn it over to Juan Carlos. And maybe when we turn it over to Juan Carlos, you can give a quick introduction to yourself, just to keep the flow going. So I'm the TechnoServe. So I'm the Research and Impact Director for the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs, or ANDE. So we're a network of about 300 organizations that support small and growing businesses around the world. So our members are capacity building organizations like TechnoServe, accelerators, incubators, foundations, impact investors, etc. So they all support these kind of growth-oriented enterprises in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South and Southeast Asia. So that's an important thing as well. We're really focused on those geographies. There we go. So today we have a session where we're going to have a couple different pieces of it. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit more generally about what ANDE has seen in terms of the COVID-19 crisis and support for small and growing businesses across our membership. So kind of a broad brush, what's happening here. And then I'll turn it over to Juan Carlos, who can go a lot deeper, and I think is sort of the meat of things of like, TechnoServe has done a lot of work in previous crises that then they were able to bring in the learnings from into this crisis. And then now that it's progressed, have been able to draw some learning from that as well, and have actually published a couple of reports and guides on supporting small and growing businesses during crises, including this one, which he'll run through. We have in here a little time for discussion. You know, we always really like to do these things a little more in an interactive way because there's a lot of different strategies. It's a fast-changing situation. So we would love to hear from those who are attending, not only your questions, but also open it up for a bit of a discussion about the strategies that you've seen being used and the challenges. We can either do that in breakout groups, or if we have a bit of a smaller number, possibly just open up the microphone and have people hop on and address some of the questions. And I really want, at that point, we want to encourage people to share because we have our own experiences, but other people have different experiences, and then close out. So I will hop right in and talk a little bit about what we're seeing with small and growing businesses and this crisis in emerging markets generally. So first of all, I'm not going to get too much into the data here about kind of the challenges to the businesses themselves, because I think it's pretty clear that this is a huge shock, right? Not only in the geographies that we are in, but the geographies we work in around the world. So both supply shock, demand shock, incredibly fast-changing situation, and also considerable geographic variation. What's happening, especially right now, what's happening in South Africa is very different than what's happening in Kenya, which is very different than what's happening in India, Vietnam, and the US, right? So it's just every geography is different at this point, which makes it hard to figure out and deal with. The one thing that's universal is the uncertainty. Even in geographies where the situation is under control, there remains the uncertainty of what's going to happen next month. And of course, for small and growing businesses, uncertainty is a big problem. Excuse me. As I mentioned, our focus is on emerging markets. I think the notable thing there is that there are often fewer government support mechanisms, not to imply that the government support mechanisms have been sufficient in the markets of like the US and Europe, but at certain points, at least, they have been there. And in some of the markets we work in, they just haven't been at all. So yeah, I'm going to give a little more context on the current landscape, and then Juan Carlos will give more specific approaches that TechnoServe has been using. So in the best of times, small and growing businesses face extremely high failure rates. That's just part of the deal of being an entrepreneur, and have major capacity, capital, and talent needs. These have all been exacerbated. So our survey of intermediaries over the summer found that by June, about 12% of enterprises they support had permanently shut down, and they estimated another 37% were at very high risk. So looking at right around half of the portfolio as businesses they support were at high risk with a significant percentage already done. Startup Genome, who look at startups around the world, have found this to be what they call an extinction level event for global startups. In particular, in the developing world, over half of startups in Africa, for example, having fewer than 3 months of runway of funding. So double the number in Europe, or more than the number in Europe, where it's only about a third there, not quite double. So a much higher proportion looking at, if they're not able to keep their revenue going, being potentially facing the prospect of shutting down. But at the same time, as we're going to hear from TechnoServe, with the right support, we have seen, especially in the last few months since summer, small and growing businesses having the ability to pivot and showing a lot of resilience. So on the one hand, a lot of fragility, but on the other hand, the nature of the creativity of entrepreneurs, the inherent creativity there that entrepreneurs bring to their businesses, giving them the ability to shift, to pivot. But this often requires support on the capital side, on the capacity building side, on the talent side. So that's where we're really looking at kind of capacity building organizations themselves as being key players here. Oops, other way. So what are these needs? I want to dig a little bit deeper here based on our surveying. And it looks like some other folks are joining Brett to make sure we let them in. So what we saw in our survey of businesses around the world is that there's a need on the capital side with grants and loans and on the technical assistance side. And we were actually surprised to see that the technical assistance need was close to as high. And this was in the summer when the situation was still extremely new. So on the capital side, we found that perhaps not surprisingly, their emergency grants were seen as extremely or very important because that's the most flexible capital, where we're seen as the most important and the most needed. Debt financing also being seen as extremely beneficial, and equity financing kind of beneficial as well, but with kind of more flexibility being the key there, right? Because the needs were just so extreme, especially at that point. This was in early summer. On the technical assistance side, at that time, huge demand for support for accessing government support or other relief mechanisms. I think that was when those relief mechanisms were just starting to come into picture. So I would suspect that at this point, that has probably gone down a little bit because there has been more guidance, and frankly, some of those mechanisms have never materialized. But where we think kind of the continued need is probably this pivoting to ventures business model, where we saw the vast majority of, or the majority of businesses seeing that as extremely or very important, and almost all businesses seeing them as moderately or slightly important. So this new environment of a lot of work having to be done online, different sales channels, different supply channels, technical assistance support there to say, how do we survive this situation? How do we pivot our business model to survive? But also high support needs, nearly 50% seeing extremely or very important, around kind of just keeping the operations running. Like, how do we manage financials in this crisis? How do we manage our operations and human resources and our supply chain? So very strong needs across the board on both the capital side and the technical assistance side. But we also wanted to take it one level up and say, okay, you have folks who are providing that technical assistance, that capital, but what are their needs, right? We always think in terms of entrepreneurial ecosystems, and that the businesses themselves are, of course, the kind of key part of those ecosystems, but those ecosystems consist of all the support mechanisms around those businesses. And those actors also have needs, right? You have capacity building organizations, investors, academic institutions, government agencies who themselves are facing massive shifts in their own businesses, their own business models, their own financials. So what we've really been pushing to funders is saying, hey, don't forget the ecosystem. Like, there's clearly these needs that the businesses have, but somebody has to provide those. And if you don't support the providers, if you don't support the supporters, then they're not going to be there now, and they're not going to be there later, right, as the recovery happens. So our members are really the ecosystem, and so we wanted to look at what are those needs, because they are important to provide online support, pivot programming, and actually shift the capital they're providing. So a lot of our investors saying, hey, we're willing to be more risk tolerant now. But these organizations are, as I mentioned, themselves at risk. Of our members, we found that And this was in June, mid-June. So, after the crisis was pretty firmly in place. The vast majority saw either moderate or high risk, which with a pretty significant percentage, about over a fifth, seeing either high or existential risk to their own businesses. So a lot of our members have a fee-for-service model, for example, and the grant makers have encouraged them, the capacity builders, to take a fee-for-service model, which is all well and good, but when the businesses have no capital themselves, who's paying those fees? And so it can kind of create this vicious cycle. If the businesses have really clear technical assistance needs, they can't pay for technical assistance. The technical assistance providers don't have any capital then to provide the assistance. If they go out of business, who's going to be there to support the businesses in the recovery? Because getting set up again as a technical assistance provider is really difficult. So we see the ecosystems at risk of collapse, not only the businesses themselves, and are really encouraging the folks who have the ability to influence the ecosystems to think how to be creative about not only supporting businesses, but also supporting intermediaries. There have been a couple of groups that have been formed, so a couple of reports I would direct you to. So our own report with Dahlberg on this data, going a lot deeper into these needs, that came out pretty early on in, I think, April. More recently, on the investor side, the Global Impact Investing Network has put out a series of reports on what investors can do to keep the impact coming during the crisis. So I encourage you to Google those. And I think I have some links in here. So just to kind of summarize some key issues to consider. So how can capacity builders adjust their programming to meet the moment? So Juan Carlos is going to cover that. They have their reports here, which you can see at this URL, and also kind of Google COVID-19 and entrepreneurs supporting business survival, TechnoServe, and you'll find it quite quickly. How can investors step up? Again, you've got the GIN, the Global Impact Investing Network, what they call the R3 Coalition. So you could find that pretty easily. There's also the website covidcap.com, which has been aggregating capital resources for entrepreneurs. And then how are funders stepping up to support ecosystems? So the WEF, the World Economic Forum, has put together the Social Entrepreneurs Alliance, which is really pushing funders and bringing funders together on how can we continue to support impact businesses. And then our own report, I did not put the link here, but if you go to Andy's website, andyglobal.org, we have a COVID-19 section, which you'd be able to find all the data from our report here. So I will stop there and turn it over to Juan Carlos to go into a little more detail on the actual strategies that they've seen on supporting businesses during this crisis.
Thank you, Matthew, and good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? Perfect, thank you. Well, my name is Juan Carlos Thomas. I'm the Global Entrepreneurship Director for TechnoServe. I'm originally from Chile, Latin America, but I've been working from our headquarters in DC since 2016. We as TechnoServe operate in 29 countries across Latin America, Africa, and India. And with such a global operations for over 50 years, this is not the first crisis we have to face. This is pretty unique, it's unprecedented, but when we started feeling that the crisis, the COVID crisis was hitting our operations and the entrepreneurs we were serving in Africa and Latin America around March, and mostly during the second quarter of this year, we quickly moved into look at what we have learned from previous and past crises, particularly for the entrepreneurs we serve. Were very relevant the recent natural disasters in Chile that prompted some crisis in my home country and the political crisis in Nicaragua. So we reflected on that. We discussed it with our teams in the field and coming up with a set of adaptations that were tested and proven in the field. And after 3 months at the end of Q2, the second quarter of this year, we compile all those learnings, both from previous crises and from the adaptation and how they work in the field during the first half of the year. and compiled it in the report that you can see here in the right. I hope I'll try to summarize my learnings here. Happy to go into details in a conversation, but I encourage you to visit all this visit this report and the resources we have put together. We feel like managing entrepreneurship development programs across 25 geographies can give us a huge opportunity to learn, and we want to share those learnings across the community. So feel free to kind of download the report, look over it, and we also would love to see your comments and interest in learning from your own experience as well. So moving into the actual learnings, if you can help me with the next slide, Matthew, please. What we saw there basically is that our entrepreneurs pretty quickly, as COVID hit their own geographies, started seeing declining sales for obvious reasons, people losing jobs, people in lockdowns. This was widespread throughout different industries. Some industries were more challenged than others. As you could imagine, tourism was kind of a no-go at all kind of industry, pretty hard hit for most basic and essential industries were a little bit less hit in terms of sales, but still pretty hard. Operational challenges, inability to open your factory or your shop, disruptions in supply chains, working from home where no one was prepared to, kids missing out school or schooling from home. So a lot of operational challenges going into the head of that of the entrepreneurs we're serving. Financial, all this at the end of the day, causing a lot of financial strains in our entrepreneurs and personal stress, with the addition of that of a particular characteristic of this crisis that we don't know what to expect. I personally come from Chile, as I mentioned, a country that used to see natural disasters causing severe crisis once in a while, in particular regions hit by earthquakes or other type of natural disaster. But we get hard hit, but you know what to expect. You know an earthquake coming, and you know what's going to happen next. In this case, we still don't know what's going to happen, how it's going to evolve, and that creates a lot of stress to the entrepreneurs we're working with. Women entrepreneurs, needless to say, face additional challenges, and women represent around 60% of the entrepreneurs we work with every year. Increased responsibility for childcare and domestic tasks, and so on. All the aspects of the heavier burden that take women usually in Latin America and Africa in the household, and the lesser authority they may have in decision making on over assets or asset and technology. And we have seen some increase in terms of gender-based violence as well. So overall, very hard. Our entrepreneurs were very hard hit, but even for women was even harder. So how we responded to this, and basically, the first is we talk about with our teams in the field about a 3-step process. The first is, let's recognize that the situation changed, and this may sound trivial, but it really deserves some time to reflect and to discuss with the team, with donors, with partners, because we were used to work in regular times to help our entrepreneurs thrive, grow. We call most of our programs accelerator programs, so people who had a business with an appetite to grow and to create more jobs and to increase sales, tap into new markets. Now the name of the game is totally different. How we help business survive, how we help business become resilient and weather this crisis, and hopefully come out of this crisis in a stronger fashion. And that requires a conversation with the team, with the donors, replanning objectives, revisiting activities, etc. And that moves us to our adaptation process. The content, we heavily reliant on training and business skills building for our entrepreneurs, and we need to adapt the skills that you may need for an acceleration process may be different from a survival process. The way we had to operate in terms of our own teams facing their own challenges, trying to work from home, facing increased burden in the household tasks, where require a lot of adaptation. Our relationship with technology, how we could work remotely, and that all that require an investment of time and resources in adapting. And finally, coming out of this adaptation, there's a lot of lessons learned that we actually, as I said, we are always looking forward to share with the ecosystem and learn from what others are doing. So that's why this presentation, the document we're going to discuss today, is so important for us. For us, it's a conversation starter. It's a way to show what we have learned, share it with the ecosystem. Hopefully you find something useful, but also for us to learn what you have learned in coping with this crisis as well. So moving into how we adapted, we moved from an acceleration toolkit to designing a survival toolkit that basically help entrepreneurs first build a mindset for survival. We have learned over crisis after crisis that the first step in this process is like a grief process. So whatever business model you created and worked well for you, it may not work anymore, or it may not work during this crisis. So you need to revisit that, and you need to revisit it with very going back to the drawing board and with a very startup mindset. Also, managing finance for resilience is proving very, very important. On average, entrepreneurs may have, if lucky, a couple of months of financial capability to cope this crisis, meaning that at the rate they were hit by in terms of lower sales and restricted operations, they could survive at most 1 or 2 months, most of them. So you need to start looking at, well, what kind of expenses can I cut? What will it make sense? How I can tap into new funding sources. So that requires a special ability that need to be built into the skill sets of entrepreneurs. Revisiting the business model is a key one. And finally, navigating the help that is available. Is a lot of foundations, governments, multilateral institutions, organizations are offering a lot of help for entrepreneurs, but it's hard to get lost in who is doing what and how you could better access to that. So that's very important to look at. So I'm going to pause a little bit on some frequent solutions that what does it mean to our clients, and in terms of revisiting their business model, and some common strategies are listed here that we're seeing from the field. Business that used to advertise in the real world now moving into online marketing strategies and creating delivery mechanisms to keep their business alive. Digitizing the whole business model has been a particular interesting one for several industries. We have customers, for example, in the education sector that they used to train adults on a particular topic in their cities, and suddenly they had to close their classrooms So they moved quickly to start training their students through digital media. And that turned out to be a big opportunity because now they were not restricted anymore to teach people in the area, but they could go way beyond that. And some of those systems are actually thrive in this context. It's not always a happy story like this one, but certainly digitizing your business model in terms of advertising, work environment, selling platform has proven to be very helpful in many situations, many cases. For those of those businesses that haven't been able to digitize their sales platform, making your business a safe place to buy has been key, and ensuring customers that is safe to shop with them has been particularly helpful. Take care of your workforce has been also very important. Making sure that your key staff remain engaged and a possibility to work has also been quite essential for the survival of these businesses. So, I mean, there's a list there, and we could go into further detail, but just wanted to show some examples of common strategies that are working quite well for our customers. Another key area of adaptation has been providing remote support. And here we tend to kind of usually resort to, let's use the fanciest tool. But our experience has shown that the best tool is the one that is accessible and that is easy to use to the entrepreneurs. Hopefully, they already have it at hand. So we used to segment our entrepreneurship acceleration and development programs by the stage of the business, by the growth potential of the entrepreneurs, sometimes by the industry, etc. And now we're also in this context segmenting the user profile of our entrepreneurs on their access to technology, because depending on whether they have smartphones or a laptop or a feature phone, or whether they have broadband connection or not, is the way we are going to be able to transfer the skills that they may need. Another big learning and for us has been it is not about moving your training or moving your advisory from face-to-face to online, just a cut and paste process. You really need to understand that connecting people to digital platforms and building the skills and prompting the behavior change you want, so they use those core skills that are going to prove are going to help them being successful, really requires a process of design that it deserves our attention. We have shared some guides about what we have learned in that regard as well. You will, if you download the guide that we're discussing here, you're going to find a link to that guide as well. Last but not least, I'm happy to report that I mean, nothing of this will be worthwhile if it's not working. So there's always room for improving and for learning, but we're an organization that is committed to measuring if what we're doing is working or not, and we're happy to report that numbers basically are showing that is the case. I'm coming with 2 examples out of our 25 programs around the world, but in Botswana, for example, we have a small growing business acceleration program, which 25 out of around 120 participants were open, while the remaining 90 or so were closed after COVID hit the country. And now we can see that situation has been almost reversed. And of course, a lot of them still are hit, but are moving from a situation where there was no point in opening the business to now we can bring in some sales and keep the business alive and weather the crisis. Moving to a totally different market in El Salvador in Latin America, we're receiving pretty good stats from our Crece tu Empresa program, where basically 88% of our entrepreneurs feel confident that they will be able to cope with the crisis, while the national survey says that the opposite for the general segment in the country. A more concrete case to prove that this is working is the case of Candy, who owns a small shop in a micro retail outlet in Kenya, what they call dukas. These are small grocery shops that are key for lower income people to access basic goods and services. She started this business in 2019 and was going pretty well after COVID hit. In the worst week, she had $7 of sales in a particular week. Can you imagine that? That's kind of devastating for a business like this. That's highly reliant on high turnovers to make it to the end of the month. But by gaining the skills provided with the survival toolkit, she managed to start digitizing her business model. And this may sound fancy, but you know, at the end of the day, here was like just promoting her business through Facebook and WhatsApp. And she started also surveying customers to figure out which products made more sense to include them in her portfolio. So she got rid out of the products that were not longer needed, and move the portfolio to products that were more demanded. And by having the ability to take sales through WhatsApp and Facebook and deliver to home, she managed to rebound the business, and now has increased sales eightfold from the lowest point. So very encouraging story there. So that's pretty much it, what I had to share. Over to you, Matthew.
Sure. So I think, so Brad, if there were any questions, I have a few questions for Juan Carlos, actually. I think it would be interesting to dive into a few places. I think it looks like we have a smaller group, so I guess I have a few questions, and then we could also open up for some comments if others have kind of strategies or experiences or challenges to share. Definitely.
And you know what, I've got some questions for you guys as well. So why don't we dive in and then we've got one here. Maybe we'll start with this one. There's a question about, Matthew, you mentioned the importance of providing support to the ecosystem players as well as entrepreneurs. Are there some examples of the way that you're engaging with governments in developing countries? And do governments have the bandwidth to focus on this with so many demands on their time? So a few questions in there, but maybe we can unpack that a bit.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. So where we have focused is really on the donor side of things, because I think the last part of that question is exactly right. I mean, national and local governments are overwhelmed themselves. Tax revenue is falling, enormous number of demands. So the idea that they're kind of going to be getting into the nitty gritty about entrepreneur intermediaries, I think it's reasonable to say like maybe that won't be their top priority. So where we've really focused on is, well, this could be a place where international donors can really play a role, because international donors aren't necessarily operating, especially, well, some of them are, like World Bank, but especially kind of a private foundation or a smaller bilateral donor isn't necessarily operating at the scale of being able to provide, just cash support to businesses, right? That's sort of a national government or an international financial institution, massive scale needed role. But then, like you said, also the intermediary support can be really hard for national governments to focus on. So where we've really been pushing is, those are important things, of course, and but for one place where donors can really play a role is supporting the ecosystem and the intermediaries and saying, hey, okay, if you have technical assistance providers, if you have these really risk tolerant investors, if you have capacity builders, how can we make sure that they are continuing to provide that support? They have the resources that they need to continue to provide that support to the entrepreneurs during the crisis and after the crisis. Maybe that means, saying, hey, well, instead, your fee-for-service model, we don't want you to cut off your support for 100 businesses because they can't pay you. So we're going to jump in and fill the gap on that fee-for-service model and kind of through emergency grants to you and help these entrepreneurs navigate the other financial structures that might be available to them. So that's where we've been focusing our efforts. I'm not going to say it's the only place that should be focused on by any means. There's obviously a lot of technical assistance that governments need. That's not our expertise. I think there's other folks out there who are providing that technical assistance to governments on how they can just provide basic relief programs to SMEs. And in terms of the mechanisms we've been using, there's some of these alliances. The COVID Alliance for Social Entrepreneurship that WEF has put together is very much a convening of donors. We have brought together a bunch of private foundations, a bunch of bilaterals a number of times to discuss these issues for intermediaries like TechnoServe, like ACDI VOCA, who has a lot of these programs, to present to them on the challenges they're seeing and make sure they're aware of them and are able to pivot their own programming. It's been hard though. A lot of these, especially government donors, they don't shift quickly. I think we've seen a couple instances where new funds have been created, but it's been hard. And so I think there's more work to be done.
Great. Juan Carlos, do you want to add anything to that?
Oh, no, I think Matthew pointed out pretty clearly. There is, the only thing I will add is that we have found that the need for skill buildings and access to finance it has always been critical for small growing businesses, but in this situation is just life threatening. So they need to support the institutions that are in the field that are providing this support to the entrepreneurs is to me pretty evident.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I think that we're so used to thinking, okay, we got to get the funding into the hands of these businesses, but really it's a question of how can we enable the people and organizations who are best positioned to do that support to really step into that role. And my question that I've had is, in a lot, not a lot, but I've seen corporations step up in really interesting ways. So those large businesses, we don't normally think of them as necessarily part of the small business ecosystem as much as we would funders like governments or NGOs. But what do you think that the role of larger corporations or those large businesses might be in helping to grow and support those small businesses who are really getting hit hard? Is there something they can do either maybe on the supply chain, community investment? What is that looking like so far?
Do you want me to go first, Matthew? Or?
Yeah, I feel like TechnoServe does a lot of corporate engagement. So yeah, I think you have a great perspective on this.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We're fortunate to have a very diverse set of partners in our entrepreneurship work, and the corporate sector has been a key one over the last years. And the opportunities are endless. The corporate sector usually represent a main market for small growing businesses, for many of them, particularly the ones that are business to business focused. So easing the process of procurement for small growing businesses is a key aspect that needs to be considered. We work extensively with the mining sector, for example, in their local economic development programs. We're the global partner of Anglo American, and we partner with them in several countries, in Brazil, in Chile, in Peru, in Botswana, South Africa, Zimbabwe. We partner with them to support entrepreneurs in their communities by helping them basically take advantage of the opportunities, the procurement opportunities that their operations represent, but also to help them diversify from the dependence from the sector. Big retailers are also have a huge opportunity to work in that regard. We're also partner with financial institutions to help them access to provide better financial support to entrepreneurs. We have an ongoing partnership with ABSA in South Africa, and with MasterCard in Kenya. The opportunities either through, I'm just referring to opportunities that come from a business angle, but also which are in supporting entrepreneurs as either as suppliers or as customers. It's also an opportunity to work with entrepreneurs as a distributor in your value chain. We have huge programs on developing micro retailers in Kenya, which are now being escalated to Tanzania, Nigeria, and Ivory Coast. Micro retailers in those markets represent 80% of the distribution channel for large consumer good companies. So, yeah, and there's a huge opportunity to help them become more efficient and more successful, which will incorporate more opportunities for the large companies to access market that otherwise they couldn't access. And I'm just referring to kind of opportunities of share value, if you wish, or where there's a business sense. It is also worth saying that a large company cannot succeed in a country in the long term, in a country that's struggling to have an inclusive development process. And overall SGVs, whether you're in your value chain or not, are a key contributor to the inclusive development of the emerging markets. So there's a good case here for supporting small growing businesses for corporates, and there is a growing number of corporates that are understanding that.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit on that. I mean, Juan Carlos mentioned MasterCard, who we have a partnership with and are working with a number of our members as well. I mean, I think they're a good example of the kind of long-term shared value. We also are working with the Visa Foundation. You know, kind of payment processing platforms have a long-term focus on formalization and digitization of small businesses, which, you know, builds the market for payment processing, small business, you know, more smoother credit products. And clearly digitization and a move online and away from kind of in person has been a big part of the shift of a lot of businesses here. So there's been a clear alignment of the long-term interests of some of those payment-oriented and digital-oriented processors and the immediate needs of small businesses, where you could find that, you know, shared value, and they've supported a lot of work around digitization and moving businesses in that direction and formalization, because that's really, you know, it doesn't require immediate trade-offs or trying to like gain their market immediately. It's really a long-term shared value, which I think represents a sweet spot for where corporates can support these businesses in a broad and like non-competitive and non-exclusive way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned sort of digitization and innovation, I mean, a lot, but being some of those drivers. I'm actually wondering, have you seen examples of small or growing businesses that have started during COVID? You know, I think we've seen some that might be thriving or doing better, but, you know, are there any that have really kind of seen an opportunity in the market, and what does that process look like? Are there sectors where we're actually seeing that innovation and people moving into the market versus kind of just surviving?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give a quick, you know, we don't work with business directly, so, but we asked our intermediaries and investors like what they thought of kind of different sectors. And I think kind of not surprisingly, healthcare and digital and like digital financial services, and we're seeing, you know, as much more of an interest to investors. They were making new investments there, so presumably new businesses were popping up. We definitely had some members whose businesses totally pivoted. So I guess it's not necessarily a new business, but they shifted completely into filling immediate healthcare needs, or completely into something like online learning from something totally different. So functionally, we're like a new business. But Juan Carlos, I'm not sure if you saw something even more drastic with new businesses coming to you, totally new.
Yeah, look, we tend to have 2 cohorts per year in each of our programs. One starting at the beginning of the year, another one starting during the second half of the year. For so far, we're getting information from the first half of the year, and most of the examples are coming from a pivoting situation. Particularly appealing has proven to be the online selling of services, where we can see a number of businesses jumping in, also providing supplies for healthcare has been another key one. None of this business has started from scratch, but has made a significant pivoting in their business model. One example which I quote was a very interesting business that started to teach. It's a business in a Latin American country who was confined. In their mind, they're confined to their city, and now they're looking at the global, the whole Latin American market, because everyone speaks Spanish in Latin America. So as long as you're teaching something that is relevant, you can take customers or students from all over the continent.
Great. Matthew, I know that you said you had a question for Juan Carlos, so I want to make sure that we get to that. Do you want to jump in?
Sure, yeah. One thing you mentioned, which I just think would be maybe an interesting last piece to share before we sign off, would be how TechnoServe is thinking about their own kind of metrics of success. Like what, because I work a lot on kind of impact measurement, and I know it's a big part of this conference. Like undoubtedly a lot of these metrics maybe we had before this aren't as relevant, right? So in your own pivot, not only how you're helping these businesses pivot, but your own pivot, how you're thinking about, what TechnoServe looks like, what success looks like for TechnoServe coming out of this, next year, how you're tracking that, how you're defining that, I think might be an interesting kind of last piece to bring in.
Well, thank you, Matthew. Well, look, you and I have had long discussions, because we're an organization that's highly committed to measure what we're trying to do and to learn out of that. So I think we can respond this into several avenues. One is, the first one, the immediate one is that the portfolio of 1,000 business we help every year are better off in coming out of this crisis than they will be if they are not, if they hadn't received our support. And key metrics there are survival and hit in sales. The history has shown us that in crises like this, we're not gonna see a growth increase in average in our portfolio in terms of revenue, but we have. We are expecting, and we have seen, that the hit in revenue is lower than what would be expected according to comparables in the market. And unfortunately, the comparables are not, are not ideal for an academic situation. So I invite academics and people who is interested in funding that kind of research to help us out to learn better from this crisis. So could be an interesting research project for an academic to see how the skill business process is helping cope with COVID. So that's one process. The other process is for us as an organization. We think that COVID is not only going to hit us. It's not going to produce disruption now. It's accelerating trends that were coming from. We're already seeing, particularly this digitization of education, of skills building, of knowledge transferring, of work, etc. So COVID may end soon or not so soon as we will wish, but it's going to end. But still, we see a world afterwards that's going to be way more digitized than it is now. So we are, while we're helping our teams in the field to kind of cope with the crisis, we're working on longer term solutions to come up with an offering that is adequate to those times. And we're piloting and testing and measuring whether those fully digital solutions can be as effective and hopefully more cost efficient than what we used to do before the crisis. So metrics of whether through a smartphone-based training, an advisory process, we could, our entrepreneurs could learn what they needed to learn, could change the way they manage the business or not, and ultimately are getting the return on investment we're pursuing. Those are kind of the metrics we're looking at.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I think that's a good one to end on. I would just encourage people to check out TechnoServe's reports, which I'll put the URL back up, as well as some of these other, our report from early in the crisis on the intermediaries, and some of these other groups like the GIN R3 Coalition.
Do you have any closing thoughts there, Matthew? Anything that you want to end on in terms of what we've talked about so far?
I would encourage folks to check out these various documents, and I'm not sure kind of the nature of who's on the call, but if you are a funder, especially, to really think hard about the role of funders here and these kind of from an ecosystem lens, that it's when you're a funder and have especially limited resources, it's not just about how many entrepreneurs you can support directly, but maybe think about how you could support them indirectly by working through intermediaries that really are the core of these ecosystems and are at a lot of risk themselves in many cases. And that if you are yourself an intermediary supporting businesses, to just really think about, how do you shift your approach entirely and rethink it. And that's why I think some of this stuff TechnoServe has put out has been so useful, as they, went back to square one and kind of rebuilt their focus from the bottom up.
Fantastic. Juan Carlos, anything that you want to kind of close on and leave us with?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us to this discussion. And I just want to make sure we keep this discussion alive. We all have a lot to learn from each other. So I invite people to download the document. My contact details are there, and we really expect to have this kind. We have learned. I mean, this like promoting these learnings has prompted a lot of conversations. I've been pulled into where I have the opportunity to learn a lot as well and inform our way forward. So thank you so much for organizing this, and thank you so much for those who attended.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again to Juan Carlos and Matthew. I think that was an incredible session that I'm going to be thinking about for a while and just trying to wrap my brain around all the stuff that you're doing. So that's incredible. And again, thank you to all of our attendees. We are recording this session. So I know we have a lot of people who couldn't necessarily participate live, but who want to access this as a resource in the future or want to come back to it. So know that that will be available if you have a live and replay ticket. So put that on your list, and we've got a few sessions coming up shortly, so make sure that you join those. I think they're starting in about 15 minutes or more, but we've got a conversation on equity and social finance, measuring the value and impact of sport, and the role of global standards and sustainability standards in moving forward business goals. So if you want to check those out, you are more than welcome, and we hope you will. And again, a final thank you to everyone. Have a great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world.